Hello, everybody. Welcome to our podcast. This forms part of a series of international development podcasts. And today we will be talking about decolonization. It's been decades since colonization, and many countries have gotten their freedom for so long now. Yet there are some schools of thought that say, well, let's get over it. It happened long ago. Why even talk about decolonization? And others believe that the process of decolonization has not been completed. So to help us with this discussion, we have an expert who has been researching on decolonization and writing about decolonization. And we will be engaging here to find out what is decolonization? Why should we even talk about it? Hello, Ruby. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you.
Yes. What is decolonization?
Yeah, it's funny when we discuss talking about this topic. It was so large in my brain because I've been working on it for so long. And it was a lot of stuff that I knew and I just couldn't figure out where to start thinking about it and where to start talking about it because it's so big. And it's also something that I think is very sensitive.
Yes.
And it's extremely misunderstood. Mm-hmm. But also at the same time, it's a term that captures a whole range of things and issues. Mm-hmm. At its essence, at its real essence, decolonization is institutional governance, related matters that now belong to the country in question. So that's the official end of colonization, administrative governance and so forth. But it also is about decolonizing power dynamics. So if we're still dependent on the old colony, let's say, if we're still constantly interacting with that economy instead of diversifying further and depending on it on aid, depending on it related to economics, defense, military, all of these factors. There's also the decolonization, I think, that is even more important. And this is something that a lot of people, when they point to issues that are going wrong in many of the so-called developing countries, non-Western based countries, they don't, I think, give it much attention in that it is about also recognizing and reframing our understanding of, A, why we're in the situation we're in. What is the real history for getting us into this situation? Is this really the perfect manner to follow? So kind of rethinking social factors, rethinking our understanding of history, rethinking our understanding of economics, rethinking our understanding of politics, power dynamics, and so forth. So it's really sort of stepping back from this overwhelming power dynamic that told us that this is right and start questioning things. It does not mean stepping into conspiracy theory.
Okay.
This morning when I was driving in, I was listening to a program on the radio, and the gentleman was talking about how people who question some scientific information are conspiracy theorists, and there's no other explanation for that. So it's not to say that, questioning is bad. Questioning is really important. We do have to question things, but it doesn't mean throwing everything out and not believing in anything. It doesn't mean that there's no sharing of information. It doesn't mean that we don't learn from the experiences of the old colonial powers in the Western world. It just means that we're much more critical, we're much more understanding. We realize that there's a multitude of ways of doing things. We realize that we had a lot to offer that was sort of erased, denigrated during the time of colonialism when we were called backwards or uncivilized or whatnot. And then recognizing that there is no one single truth per se, depending, and that we could draw on many different pieces of knowledge, including our own, that a lot of people assume is backwards or has nothing to offer.
Okay, and drawing on our own knowledge, why should we even decolonize? Why?
I think, as a prof in international development, I've had this question asked me multiple times. And my answer to them is, how's it going so far? In a sense where if we talk about all these theories of development, and we talk about this is how it needs to be done, this is how it needs to be done, this is how it needs to be done, a lot of it erases what already exists. And the reason why it erases what already exists is because we believe that there is a supremacy of knowledge, a supremacy of being, a supremacy of behaving, a supremacy of organizing societies, politics, and so forth. And interestingly enough, that supremacy is basically based on Western knowledge and Western understanding and Western experiences. And a lot of it is not working in other places around the world. But more interesting, I think, at a point that is much more interesting than that, is that a lot of it also doesn't work in these Western countries. So a lot of us who live in other countries around the world and then come to Western countries see them as, wow, it's amazing. And then when we live here for a little bit, and then we see the issues and the structures and the difficulties and some of the challenges that exist, which is normal because these challenges exist in every society.
Yes.
When we see these, we're a little bit shocked because we had this sort of amazing understanding and view of these countries. And then we start questioning, well, if this is the best system that they have and these things are happening, then why? And we get to this point, I think, when we accept that there are some issues and problems with this perfection that we were taught. And then we're willing to engage with it instead of just saying, no, it's their fault. They don't know how to do this. They don't know how to do that. So when we go a little bit further into our own analysis, and so when we look at this and we realize that there's no perfect system, and then when we realize that a lot of these theories are based on one so-called truth, and that truth is based on the values, norms, beliefs of a specific society anchored in specific main culture. Within that culture, there are differences, we have to admit, but just generally main culture. And then when we see that it is anchored in that, and then we look at other cultures, and then we look at other ways of doing and other ways of behaving. And then one of them, for example, is just a very simple example, is individualism. Western cultures are very much anchored in individualism. Many non-Western cultures, for the longest time, some still are, anchored in social and societal norms that are not individualistic. So when we see that at the base of the theories that are being proposed are assumptions and presumptions that don't necessarily apply to other cultures, to other experiences, also are based on this belief of a free world that in many so-called post-colonial, which is really not post-colonial countries, they're not really that free. The power dynamics and issues related to international governance make it such that it's not that free. So when we look at these assumptions, we realize maybe this is not applicable. But if that's not applicable and this is the only way we were taught and that these are the supreme points or this is the best way to do, but yet it doesn't apply, then we get to a fork in the road. Do we completely change to become fully like these societies, which a lot of people in the non-Western world, when they see the Western world from the outside, believe that that's the solution, and when they come to the Western world. And others say, no, we want to hold on to our culture. We want to hold on to what we believe, like, communal approaches to things, like issues related to more equality, social interactions, leaving no one behind, and so forth. I'm not talking about every culture around the world, depending. And some highlight, for example, importance of the environment much more than in the Western world. And then they say, we want to hold on to these things. Well, if they want to hold on to these things, then there is a contradiction between what we're being taught as the right way of doing and the history, and that this is the best approach and the supremacy of that, and what we want to hold on to. And if we go back and we look at the history of how we got to where we got to, the real history of how we got to where we got to, I have to emphasize, the real complex history that has been cleaned up. And in different ways, extremists on either end have cleaned up this history of how we got to where we got to. Then we realize that a lot of these assumptions, a lot of the mistakes, a lot of the problems that we are facing in the non-Western world are a result of I would say more or less, yes, issues within society, because you can't escape those wherever you go, but also issues related to the colonial system and what we now call the neo-colonial system, which is that power and that control indirectly or directly that continues after the official administrative governance-related decolonization.
Okay. You spoke about how our history has been cleaned up, going back to what we've been taught. In your field and as a professor, how can knowledge production be decolonialized and institutions in general?
Yeah, and that's a really important question, and that's a journey I had to take on my own, because when I first came to Canada, I personally also sort of took Canada as wow. And mind you, I was coming out of a civil war. You know, I lived through the Civil War. I came to Canada and it was all clean and proper. People were standing in line and, you know, you'd go somewhere and you didn't have to pay a bribe to get a paper and, you know, all these things. And there were rules and instructions and people actually followed them. People stopped at red lights, you know, with their cars. And and then you had a you know, it's something telling you stop walking, stop crossing, which was very alien to me. And as a young person who came here, I was very young, I was a teenager. To me, that was like, oh my God, how can I take this and take it over back home to Lebanon? And I tried. For the longest time, I tried.
How did you try?
I would go talk to Lebanese people. I would go back to Lebanon. I would yell at them about, you know, how backwards we were, uncivilized. We didn't understand the world. Look at other places, how dirty we were, how, you know, this and that and whatever. And, you know, it was interesting because all I saw, even though I faced a lot of racism when I came to Canada, but what stuck with me was the good stuff. The bad stuff in Canada didn't stick with me.
Okay.
And what stuck with me in Lebanon was the bad stuff. The good stuff didn't stick with me. And it's only really, I think when I was a lot older and my children were born, at least the first two, that I started thinking about my culture. And then I started thinking about raising my children. And then I started looking at Canadian society and realizing, well, there are some things I really don't like. And that is, it's not that great. And that sort of got me to start thinking about other things. And at the same time, I was working in international development for the Canadian International Development Agency. And I was realizing how our suggestions and, you know, you should become like a federal government like Canada in the governance system, or you should do this or you should do that, how really it was promoting the supremacy of Canada rather than truly finding solutions that actually worked given the circumstances that people were in, plus the reason why they were in these circumstances. And all of these power dynamics behind the scenes that are not very evident to a whole lot of people. And those two got me to really start, you know, rethinking some of these issues. And then when I was doing my PhD, I started really thinking about the assumptions and the presumptions that underpin all of these theories of development, all of the theories of political science that we use, economics, even social stuff, and started to realize actually they're based on specific understanding. So one example, and I wrote an article about this, is how we understand civil society.
Okay. Yeah.
Why do we understand civil society to only be these actors that promote democracy and people's rights? And why do we assume that whoever sits together and tries to work for society will always work for the benefit and the positive of society and improve democracy? Does that mean that all of the other groups that are working to benefit people in other countries, indigenous groups working to benefit people in other countries that don't do it from a democratic perspective, does that mean they're not civil society? Well, then who are we excluding and who are we including? And what if these groups are more legitimate in that society because they're seen as part of that society versus an NGO or a civil society organization that comes from the outside and says, or is so influenced by the outside about democracy that barely represents people there? So it was a lot of this sort of rethinking and trying to understand the whys and the hows that really got me to understand that, you know, there's a model here. Great. It works for Canada. But it doesn't mean it works everywhere. And it doesn't mean it's the best model. And it doesn't mean that this is what everybody should want or wants around the world or innately desires around the world. So what I say to my students often is, my first exercise is, okay, take 2 minutes. Tell me what's really good about your country of origin. And now tell me what's bad about Canada. Not because I want to denigrate Canada. That's not the issue. But because we have such a desire to always assume that we're worse off than here, because there's a lot that we see. We see, like I said, clean roads, organization, lack of corruption, elections, people working, getting money, health, and so. And then I say, and another exercise that says, how did Canada get to be what it is? How is Canada funding all of this? Where is it bringing its money from? Where is the Canadian economy drawing a lot of its funds from? What does this mean for other countries around the world? So especially a lot of Canadian companies elsewhere, especially about, Canadian protection for its own industries that works for Canada, but not necessarily for other countries, and has negative implications for other countries, especially countries that are starting from, a difficult economic environment. How is Canada acting on the international stage? Is it allowing the other countries, the policy space, which we've talked about before, the policy space to do what this country needs to do? So, when you step back and you look at this and you try to sort of rethink the examples that you use or you draw on, rethink who you're looking up to. Assess that with the totality of what it is. Rethink about how you see your own society. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong, but there are good things. Can you draw on the good things? And also, can you understand some of the bad things as a result of a combination of local issues and issues historical and issues that are impacted by the international sphere on your own country. So when you step back and you look at this, then there isn't one single truth.
Okay.
Right? And it becomes much more complex.
There's also a lot of belief that decolonization should start with the mind.
Yes.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, the moment you start rethinking history and questioning history, again, we're not going into conspiracy theories. It's easy to fall into conspiracy theories. But when you start questioning history and when you start wanting to learn your own history before you learn the history of France or before you learn the history of England, or you learn the history of whatever, right? I have to say the focus right now on decolonization is decolonization from the Western world. There have been other empires and there have been other colonizers. But I think the important part to keep in mind is that the power of the Western world, and that's what we call neocolonization, the power of the Western world to dictate certain things. Until now, it might be shifting, but until now has been dominated by the Western world and Western ideology and Western knowledge and Western science and Western, expertise. And it really has been the purview of the Western world. And so when we talk about decolonizing the mind, it's about questioning these things. It's about realizing that the Western world doesn't hold the truth, that we have truth. Even if it's different from the truth of the Western world, it could still be good. And the Western world has a lot to learn from the non-Western world, the same way that the non-Western world can learn from the Western world. So I think what is important is that understanding that we need to get out of this hole we're in where we automatically accept what's coming from the Western world. We automatically assume that this is what we want, that this is what we look forward to because this is the best. Because honestly, it's intellectual laziness. If we always assume that the Western world has the best solution, even though we know that, for example, democracies in the Western world have their faults. If democracies in the Western world worked perfectly, why is there racism? Why are there so many problems in society? It's because they don't work perfectly. I'm not saying you shouldn't have democracy. That's not at all what I'm saying. But every system has its faults. Okay, so if every system has its faults, shouldn't we take a step back and see if there's a better system? Shouldn't we try to come up with a better system, whether it's that same system with quite a bit of changes or another system, instead of just, adjusting things here and there and hoping one day we'll get to that amazing point in the future that we want to? Why are we so intellectually lazy to not want to think about alternatives, to not want to think about doing something different?
The final question is, if you could paint a decolonized society in the next 20 years, what would it be?
Oh, that is a very good question. I think I would start off by saying, do not think in polars. I was having a conversation with my father not too long ago. And my father said, I prefer the U.S. over USSR because even though the U.S. did some bad things for Lebanon, they did more good than the USSR or Russia. And I looked at him and I said, but do we have to do one or the other?
Yeah.
Do we have to do those, this or that? And now it's like U.S., Russia, or China. Like, do we have to do any one of these? Can't we just do us? Can't we build us and then we decide how to interact with each of these countries? Why do we have to be followers? Why do we have to decide whether we're in this camp or that camp? I say this and people would say, oh my God, your head in the sky, your head is in the sky. What do you mean? These are powers, global powers. But when I say we don't have to do this or that, you can still interact with the global powers. I'm not saying to close yourself off, but I'm saying interact with them in a smart way where you can still hold on to what you have, what you figured is important for you as a society, what you have re-educated yourself on that was amazing about what you had as a society, as a culture. Look to these countries, look to experiences of other countries, look to research that's been done internationally in other countries, learn from them, because you don't have all the truth. You cannot have all the truth. And research has been done to show if you do this, then this will happen in some cases, and some of it is philosophical. But you look at these and then you learn from these instead of just isolating yourself and making the same mistakes that you don't necessarily have to repeat. But when you look at them, look at the assumptions that underline or underlay these theories. Look at the presumptions. Look at the starting points. Look at what's required for them to succeed and assess whether you have those or not for various reasons, or whether you want those or not for various reasons. So I think for me, the ideal is one that has not gone back 200 years, 300 years, 1,000 years, erased all knowledge that has come from the Western world or from other colonizers. It is one that has recognized that it holds so much that is good and that could be built on, and that draws on knowledge and expertise and information from other countries, but does not just accept them as it is because it's either this or that, or this group or that group, or if not, I am going to be backwards. And defines its own development the way it wants to define its development. And I think that's the society I would hope to see, if I could say this. And a society that, again, don't fall into one camp or the other camp. Be your own. Don't be intellectually lazy. Be your own camp. Don't exclude yourself from what's happening, but know where your red lines are. Know what you want for your own society. And that's hard because in every society, especially now, you have people that are educated abroad in Western countries that go back. They have these ideas. It's hard for them to decolonize their minds. It's hard for them to start questioning things. And again, decolonization does not mean throw everything away. That's not what it is. But it's hard for them to accept these things. It's hard for them to look at things in a different direction. So they have a lot of work to do. But societies are going to be complex. You have those traditionalists. You have these people that are coming that think that the traditionalists are backwards, uncivilized, because they're, again, thinking from a specific perspective. There are others who want to change, but they want to hold on to this and that. So it's going to be a very difficult exercise for society as a whole. It'll never be perfect. It won't respond to everybody's desires or needs. But if a society protects that process from extreme division and extreme interference, that comes from the outside, whether Western world or otherwise, I think the society can come to its own definition of who they are, what they want, what their benefit is, and how they see their future, and how they embark on or I wouldn't say embark because they've already embarked on it, but what that the development or the future path, looks like and what it means for them. Even though, again, it's not easy, it's not a walk in the park, it's very, very, very difficult. But no society has been able to change or redefine itself or even define itself without these difficulties. So for people who would say, yeah, but it's difficult, we don't want that, well, then basically you're being intellectually lazy, because the only way that Canada got to where it got to is through these difficult decisions, and also, frankly, by oppressing a whole lot of people. So no society got to where it got to because it was an easy path. Every path is a difficult path, but it's an investment worth making, and it's through that path that then you decide which path you're on or you will be on, and which fork of the road you're going to turn left or right on. There's no going back, though.
Okay, so every path is a difficult path, but an investment. And
Exactly.
Don't be intellectually lazy. On this note, we come to the end of today's podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please continue to follow us, like and share.
And interact.
Yes, and interact with us.
Ask us questions.
Yes, do leave us comments in the comment section. Share with your friends. And big thank you to Ruby for joining us.
Well, thank you.
And to the entire ADEV team, thank you so much. And to our viewers,
Yes.
we can't do this without you. So until
Exactly.
another time, bye-bye.
Thank you.